My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life. Welcome to the Duck Milk Pride YouTube channel. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and this live stream is part of a series I am calling Reading Reviews with Rebecca, which is sometimes hard to say, a lot of alliteration. But this series will analyze the critical reception of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice through the negative reviews written by top critics from Rotten Tomatoes, one review at a time. And this has been quite the project, but I'm happy to report we're almost finished. We are close to wrapping this puppy up, so we'll figure out what's next after it's over. But when I was prepping for the next live stream that I was going to do after I'd finished this one up, I was like, oh, the next week is the last one. So I was surprised by myself. I know I've been doing this for a long time, so it made sense that close to 40, I think it's 38, but somebody can count for me. The close to 40 reviews. So we've been doing this for quite a while. But this series is not meant to belittle anyone's opinions, but rather serve as a study of art criticism and how we discuss film. I'm hoping this endeavor will encourage all of us to be better consumers of cinema. And before I hop into the review, I just wanted to acknowledge the chat and the folks that have joined me for this live stream. You could have hung out with the Nerd Queens and Zack Snyder, and I encourage you to do so if you want to check out their YouTube live stream. They may still be going, I'm not sure, but if they are, definitely check them out. And if you missed the live portion, follow them up on the replay. Good information there. But I see Dennis in the chat saying, hey, hi, Rebecca, how are you doing? Doing pretty well. I've been absent from these live streams for a little bit. Life has kind of caught me off guard, so I'm trying to get back into these a little more regularly. I may have to miss next Sunday, but I should be able to hop in there. So as per usual, check the schedule and see when I'll be live, get that notification so that so that you won't miss it. But I wanted to acknowledge Dennis, and I was going to do this towards the end. But Dennis, I stumbled upon a video that you did on YouTube. I was just searching because when I was doing a little bit of research for this stream and this review, I was looking at Perry White scenes from BVS on YouTube just because I'm lazy and I didn't want to fire up HBO Max or pop my Blu-ray in. And I saw a video compilation that you put together, and it was BVS, but just Perry White scenes. And I was like, Dennis, that's genius. It was so fun to watch. So I think, I left a comment because I just wanted to thank you for the service that you provided for just putting the Perry White scenes in there, because I think what that does And I would have done something similar, but I'm scared of getting like a YouTube strike for like using copyrighted material well, I didn't get a strike, but I did get a message one time and like a warning from YouTube about using copyrighted material in some of my BBS analysis stuff. So I was like, oh, try not to do that as much as I can. So I get a little weary about posting, just straight clips from something, uh but I was like, this is great. This video shows that there is humor in BVS. There's lots of it, and it doesn't just come from Perry White, but Perry White's one of the main comedic relief characters in the film, and so that's going to be important for us in this review that we're going to be talking about this week. So that is something worth noting, because we will get into the humor and the comedy aspects because this timeout.com writer had lots to say about that. Let's see in the chat. Forgive me for mispronouncing it, because I definitely will. But user Zing, I'm not even going to attempt it. I'm going to butcher it, and I want to apologize. But I got a comment saying Zing Yingli. I attempted it. Again, I apologize for mispronouncing it. But this user says, "Hi, Rebecca. Really enjoyed the Man of Steel 10th anniversary panel." I'm glad you did. That is in reference to a Man of Steel panel I did at Atlanta Comic Con this year. So if you want to check that out, the backstory for those panels that I do at Atlanta Comic Con, you can go to the convention for free if you do a panel. I should mention that first because I'm working the system. But the second part of that is that at Dragon Con, I've had a lot of negative experiences being a Zack Snyder fan there. Very negative. And people don't embrace fans of those films. I guess I'll say that. And so I vowed that if I was going to do Atlanta Comic Con stuff, I would do panels on Zack Snyder films. That would be that would be my way into it. And sometimes I would do Supergirl stuff, because I do a podcast called Supergirl Radio, so I do talk about Supergirl a lot. So I do have some things I can share that way. So if there's Supergirl stuff, I'd do a panel. But I've been trying to do anniversary panels on Zack Snyder films. I did one for Watchmen. I'll probably do one for Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice in 2026. So when that anniversary comes around, so Man of Steel turns 10 years old this year. So I thought that would be very fitting, especially given all the stuff that went down with Henry Cavill. So I'm glad that you enjoyed the Man of Steel panel. Hopefully it provided a lot of different voices. I just want to acknowledge the volunteer I had for that panel. His name, I believe, if I remember correctly, was Charlie. I had a friend of mine who was going to be doing that with me, but kind of at the last minute, he was unable to come. And so I was kind of doing it by myself. And so I asked people in the room if anybody would like to come up and talk about Man of Steel with me. And I know that's very intimidating for somebody who just wanted to show up and hear people talk. And then like, oh, I get the opportunity to talk myself. But he was such a good sport, and he had a lot of really good thoughts to share. So I just wanted to give him a shout out, because that was a totally volunteer effort from him. And he left with a Superman Funko that I had bought in the vendor floor. And so hopefully he found that to be a good, rewarding experience. He got to take something home, because if you go to one of my panels, I always want to give something away, because I always think that those make for the best panels. I mean, it's good to have information and discussions, but it's nice if maybe you can win something in the end of it. So that's a lot of fun. So he was a good sport. So I'm glad you enjoyed that panel. Let's see. And we'll get to the review. I don't want to take too much time hopping in the chat, but Dennis also says, great news. I just got a friend of mine who didn't like BVS when it came out to try the movie again. He first saw at age 8 in a convention, convinced him to watch with a more mature outlook. Well, that's awesome, Dennis. Yeah, I can imagine for an 8-year-old that might be difficult to digest. Although I shouldn't downplay 8-year-olds. I saw Batman 89 in, of course, 1989. I would have been around 8 or 9 years old. I can't remember exactly when that film came out, but I saw it like immediately. my parents were very nice to take, this 8, 9-year-old to a PG-13 film. They did a lot of research. They asked around and they thought it would be okay for me to see. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I still love it to this day. And so, I was probably around that time when I saw Batman 89. So, I think it's interesting having that experience when I was a kid. I felt a certain way about that film. And now watching it as an adult, I have different perspectives on it and different outlooks, and I see things a little differently. And so, I think once you get a little more life experience, I think that helps inform your perspective. And so that's something that we'll talk at the end of this live stream series. We'll probably talk about how I would suggest that we can fix film criticism, because I believe it is broken. So that will kind of play into some of those suggestions that I have. So that's very cool. Let's see. David says hi. So, hi, David. Thank you for joining me. The True Belmont says Beavis is the best. I agree 100%. That's 100% true. It's not even in a subjective opinion. That's just an objective fact. Okay, David says, I guess Batman 89 came out June 19th, 1989. So I would have been 8 years old then. So I guess your young friend and I would have had similar experiences. Thank you for that fact checked. I couldn't remember. I thought maybe I was not fully 9 years old at the time. So thank you for fact checking me on that. Okay. Well, that's some house cleanup, I guess, and welcome in the chat. So thanks for joining me. Feel free to drop any comments or questions you have in the live chat as we get through this review, because this one is, I got to be honest, it's a real doozy, so buckle up. So this week, I will be reading the penultimate review for this project that I've been doing, which is from timeout.com, titled Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. That's all the title is. Written by Joshua Rothkopf. And I hope I did not completely mispronounce that. It's a difficult one to say. Rothkopf, I think, is correct. It's worth noting that according to his Twitter account, Joshua is a member of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association and is the vice chair for the National Society of Film Critics. So a lot of prestige affiliations there. You can click on the link in the video description below for his review if you'd like to follow along and read it for yourself. And I highly encourage you to do so, that you know that I'm not making any of this up. This is a real review that you can go and read, and we can read it together. It does. I put in my notes. Let's see. Is this one? Did I want to check and make sure that I did, because sometimes I like copy and paste these. Okay, so you can read this one. Last week's was archived, but this one you can actually go back and click on and take a look at for yourself. So some of these get archived because it's been 7 years. So sometimes you have to subscribe to read them, but this one did not. You can click it for free. So if Joshua, the reviewer we're going to be talking about and looking at his thoughts, should ever see this video, I just want to say that I'm aiming to do this as civilly and analytically as possible. And I would ask that anyone watching live or posting in the comments would do the same. I'm simply taking a look at the criticism for and of BVS now from an historical point of view, given that these reviews were used by Warner Brothers in their decision-making process regarding the DC Extended Universe. Due to the poor reviews for Batman v Superman, the tone and approach to the franchise were changed for Justice League and ultimately led to the destruction of the Snyderverse as we knew it and know it, I guess, is a past and present tense there. All right. So before I get into Joshua's thoughts, though, I'm sure that some viewers might think, well, this guy's with all these film critic associations and writes for a news outlet and has a lot of reviews under his belt. So what do you have to say about any of this, Rebecca? And I would say to that, fair question. So I'll play a little video and let you know some of my credentials, things I can bring to the table, and then we'll come back and we will get into the review. I graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, with a degree in telecommunications and film and a focus on broadcast television production. While I've never been to film school, in my television and production experience, I've learned about and have lots of practice in operating cameras, shot composition, and editing. Lighting, green screen, and audio are my weak spots, admittedly, but I've been working on those. After working in local TV news, running cameras, and working in production, I got a job at Turner, now Warner Media, or whatever they're calling themselves now, for 14 years. I worked with networks, or brands as they call them now, like TBS, TNT, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, True TV, and Turner Classic Movies as a video encoding specialist. I also did a fair amount of closed captioning work and DVD and Blu-ray QC. In case you are wondering how I podcasted about Supergirl and the DCEU films while working for a Time Warner company, I actually got permission and clearance from my human resources representative. If you think I wouldn't criticize stories that were under the same corporate umbrella, that was never a problem nor a concern for me. If I thought the Supergirl TV series or a DCEU film had faults, I said so. In the last 17 years, I have served as a director, technical director, and camera operator at my local church in a live production capacity. I've been a video editor for 17 years, having worked in Avid, Final Cut, and Premiere Pro CC. In my day job, I shoot and edit news and documentary-style video content that involves interviews and narrative storytelling. I'm also currently an amateur photographer and am aiming to improve my efforts in still photography. You can check out my work over at Instagram at @TheDerbyKid. Link is in the video description below. While discussing these film reviews, music and film scores will inevitably come up. It may be good to know that in my life I have played piano, handbells, clarinet, bass clarinet, bassoon, acoustic guitar, and have even started learning how to play the ukulele. I've played in marching bands, symphonic bands, and wind ensembles, and have sung in many choirs. While I don't consider myself a world-class musician, far from it, actually, I do know some things about music and am a big fan of film scores and soundtracks. In addition to my production and musical experience, I have had lots of experience in art criticism. I've been podcasting about television and film since 2009 and do so on a regular basis with Supergirl Radio, a podcast I co-host about the CW Supergirl TV series. I am also a writing contributor to the Justice League Universe podcast that offers analysis on the DCEU films. You might even hear my voice occasionally in recordings and audio commentaries over there. I'm not an expert, but I care deeply about film, television, storytelling, and art. So I hope this gives you a background on where I'm coming from. I just wanted to fact check myself. The guest panelist for the Man of Steel panel I did at Atlanta Comic-Con, his name was Charles, not Charlie. So I was giving him a nickname that he did not suggest that I use. So I just wanted to correct that and fact check myself on it. Dennis makes a guess in the chat before we get started saying, now let me look at my magic ball. The review is going to call the movie too dark, say that there needs to be more jokes, and generally use MCU comparisons. Well, put that in your quiver, I guess. We'll see if Dennis's predictions come to pass as we get into this review. So let's just get started. Let's dive in. So this is Joshua's review from timeout.com. So I like to start at the beginning with the title. The title is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Not super creative. And I think it's pretty boring, but that seems to be very common with these film reviews or film critiques. A lot of times they just go with the title of the film. So to be fair, I don't know if it was not aiming to be creative or if that's just the way that they do things at this outlet. So that very well could be the case that this is just the format. So I'll try not to critique that too much. But if I was a film critic, I would want to give a little creativity to things. And sometimes the outlets have the editors create the title. So that could also be the case. So can't really blame that on the film critic. So try not to put too much into that. But there is a subheading for this one. It says rival crime fighters Batman and Superman go head to head in a superhero blockbuster that lacks strong performances, personality, and humor. Noteworthy to point out that humor is spelled with an O-U-R. So to me, that signals that this is not an American reviewer. So this might be somebody from the United Kingdom, somebody from Europe is my guess. I don't know where Joshua is located or where he is from, but it is worth noting that I guess timeout.com at least spells humor in that way. So thought that might be worth pointing out. So there could be possibility of cultural differences here, maybe. So just wanted to note that. And it's also worth looking at the fact that there's 2 out of 5 stars here. So I always think it's really interesting when there's a 5-star rating system that is given, and they hated the review, they hated the film, but then they give it 2 stars, and I'm always curious about that. Like, why two? Why not zero? Why not one? What gave it two? That's almost half. So so 2 out of 5 stars here from Joshua at timeout.com. So we'll see if we can figure out what those 2 stars are for. Okay, so let's get into the actual body of the review. But I guess, well, actually, before we do that, I do want to continue talking about the subheading. I forgot I had more to say on that. So it mentions not only lack of humor, which is just a flat out lie. It also suggests what I think is really interesting about this subheading. Actually, is that it starts off pretty decent, a pretty good, accurate depiction and description of the film. But then the second part of it gets to the opinion segment of the subheading, and I disagree with all of the opinion part because Joshua says that the film lacks strong performances. In my opinion, I think all of them are strong performances. I don't think there's a weak link in the bunch, if you ask me. So I'm curious to know why Joshua thinks that the performances are lackluster here in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. The subheading also says that BVS doesn't have any personality. So I guess I would disagree with that too, and maybe it's because I don't know what a personality is. So I went to look it up and to see if there was something maybe I was missing about that word. So Merriam-Webster's definition of personality says the condition or fact of relating to a particular person, the complex of characters that distinguishes an individual or nation or group, the totality of an individual's behavioral or and emotional characteristics, a set of distinctive traits and characteristics, distinctive or excellence of personal and social traits. So those are all definitions of personality that I thought were applicable to this way it was being used. So in my opinion, by all of these definitions, BVS is all personality. It's a film that has distinctive traits and characteristics as per the definition, and it's relating to a particular person in that it reflects Zack Snyder's vision for the story and the universe. So I have a hard time understanding why Joshua here says that BVS doesn't have personality when I think it's covered in personality. And this is another example in the subheading, and we'll get to it, I think, a little bit later on in the review, that this is another film critic who claims that Batman v Superman doesn't have any humor, which is just, it may seem a little harsh, but this is a lie. This reviewer is lying to the reader to say that it doesn't have any humor. It's just a flat out lie. So I think that some of those things need to be called out when you're lying to your reader, when you're lying to people who are going to consume this. It's factually incorrect. And he would have known that this is factually correct. This is not something that, oops, he didn't know. If he watched the film, he would know that there were instances that were at least attempting to be moments of levity and comedy. And so we'll get into why I think Joshua doesn't understand the comedy bits in here. But for him to be a film critic who is a member of all of these very prestigious organizations for film critics, for him to say that there was no humor in the film, he's either not very intellectual or he's lying to you. So I don't know which one is worse. You can pick. So I think as a film critic, what I always try to do if I'm reviewing something, and I even did it here in this live stream when I corrected myself on Charles' name. Like, I got it close. I called him Charlie because I had a friend in high school named Charlie, and that's probably why that happened. But I wanted to make sure that I said his name correctly. And so that that's something that I think as a reviewer, if you're going to either be discussing it for a podcast or you're going to be writing it for a like a film review that's written out, I think it's my responsibility to always be truthful to the reader or the audience, the viewing public or the audio listener. I always want to be truthful. I always want to be accurate. I make very meticulous notes about things. You should see my Supergirl notes that I have. I've built a very big database for the CW/CBS's Supergirl TV series. If you ever need to know anything, I probably can find it for you. I have my own kind of Arrowverse wiki in my Google Docs. So I try to make very detailed notes so that if I need to go back to something, I can. And I always want to make sure I get it correct. That's why I will typically go see a film that I'm reviewing at least twice, because sometimes you might forget something or it just kind of you see it and it's gone a second later. So that's maybe something to talk about in my follow up to this series about ways I think that we can improve film criticism, and I think that would be one of them, because I've seen that a lot in these reviews that we've covered is that they're just not accurate. They don't have it correct. And sometimes I think they write things that they know are lies. And I think that's irresponsible and negligent on behalf of the reviewer. And that's just my personal standard that I try to hold for myself is to be, even if I get something wrong, the podcasting is nice because you can have a discussion, and especially if you do it live, people can fact check you live. And I always welcome that. I welcome the correction so that I can get things right. If I've got it wrong, let me know. So I know I went on a long spiel about that, but I feel very strongly about telling the truth, because a lot of these reviews, especially for Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, did this kind of thing, and it tainted the waters, and it made things look bad in the public. People would point to these. I remember back in 2016, people would say, "Well, but Rotten Tomatoes said." Well, these are the kind of things that are coming out of the Rotten Tomatoes top critics. The top critics. These are not like the bottom critics. These are the cream of the crop top critics. And this guy lied to us in the subheading, and he's going to lie to us again in the body of the paragraph. So I just think it's irresponsible as a critic, and I only say that coming from a place of me personally trying to get things right. I would never say something did not have humor. Even if I didn't think it was funny, I would acknowledge that this was trying to be funny. So I think that's the way to go. If it was me, if I was Joshua's editor here, I would tell him, like, hey, maybe don't say it has no humor. Just say you didn't like the humor, I think is the better way to go about that. So yeah, that's a long tangent on that. And I try not to be too mean, but I always have to think, is this ignorance or is this an intentional lie? So I always have to ask myself when I'm reading these reviews, because maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't know. But it just seems like it's inaccurate hyperbole, I think is what I'm trying to say. So okay, so we've covered that's a lot. We covered a lot in the subheading. So to be fair, that's a good subheading because it gave us a lot to think about right before we even started into the actual review. So I will give it that. The subheading gave a lot for conversation. All right, so starting into the review, it says, quote, Zack Snyder's lumbering superhero melange, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, feels like a $250 million tombstone for a genre in dire need of a break. It's supposed to be the glorious ramp up to a new crime-fighting franchise, DC Comics' Justice League, but you'll wish this strenuously empty movie had boned up on a few lessons beforehand. There's zero humor or self-deprecation as there was in Joss Whedon's pitch perfect The Avengers. No performance of unlikely depth like the one Heath Ledger pulled off in The Dark Knight, and no animating spirit of decency, a trait Christopher Reeve's Superman had in spades, unquote. Lots to unpack here. So to me, in my opinion, is how I'm reading it. The opening, and I should clarify, all of my thoughts on this review are my perspective as a reader. So this is how I'm interpreting this review. So the opening sentence to this review, to me, comes across as if it's a critic who dislikes superhero films and is taking it out on Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Because why mention the genre? You don't have to. You could recognize this as a critic. I would even go as far to say that it's not just a comic book film, it's a drama. If you want to categorize things, I would put BVS in the comic book genre. I would put it in the drama, the dramatic film category. You could maybe even put thriller. There's some aspects of this that maybe could be put into a thriller. Action would definitely be a category that I would put it in. So it's interesting to me that Joshua here mentions the genre right up top before even getting into the actual merit of the film. So the reason I question that is that I was trying to think through, why would he mention it? Because if he liked the genre, he would make it just about the film. He would make this review all about the film. If he disliked DC, which some of these critics seem to do, then he would put a positive Marvel spin on it, as if he liked the genre. So I'm confused about why he's mentioning the genre here, and how it's a genre that's in dire need of what did he say, a break. So clearly, to me, that seems like he does not like the comic book genre as a whole. So I don't think Joshua is being 100% objective here. So I think there's a lot that he's, even right out of the gate, putting on this film that maybe it doesn't deserve. That's how I'm reading that anyway. So I just want to acknowledge that the opening is not discussing the merit of the film. I would like to point out that it talks about everything else but the merit of the film, the budget, the company behind it, which is DC Comics. Doesn't even mention Warner Brothers, I don't think. It just talks about DC Comics. It talks about the genre. It talks about the franchise. Nothing really about the merit of the film and what it was putting forth. I also thought it was interesting that Joshua here mentions the word mélange, which means, quote, a mixture often of incongruous or incompatible elements, unquote. So if you did not know what that word was, and I hope I pronounced it correctly en français, so that's what that meant if you were struggling with that word, which I had to look up. I took 4.5 years of French, and I was like, I need to remember what that means. Joshua calls Dawn of Justice an empty movie. And I would really love to know why Joshua thinks this. This is, if I was to meet Joshua, I would ask him this, because for me, Batman v Superman is a film layered with meaning. It's not empty at all. Like, it's the opposite of empty. It's full of it's a movie that is filled to the brim with meaning. It uses Superman as an allegory for Christ and for the passion of the Christ. Superman can also be viewed as a statement on immigrants and how the United States handles them. Batman's art carries meaning about how to come to terms with your past and how to move forward, and about how a fallen man can be redeemed. It talks about, it shows multiple characters acting out due to their powerlessness, which they feel in and about certain circumstances. The story shows two major characters viewing each other as enemies, and ends up with them seeing each other as equals and finding common ground. There's the theme about how man fights with God, which involves Batman and Lex Luthor, which is probably my favorite theme in the film, because it deals with Batman and Lex Luthor. It's paralleling them and kind of contrasting them towards the end. They make different decisions. They have the same motivation, but differing outcomes of it. But it shows, man versus God, which I love. There's even a great love story with Clark and Lois where she digs up the truth behind what Lex is doing so she can clear Superman's name. And that's not even naming all of the thematic elements of the storylines in the film that carry meaning. I'm sure there are other people watching this or in the chat or anyone else that has ever talked about BVS. I'm sure there's so many more things that people have taken from the film. I always talk about, I think it's Pulp Cultura on Tumblr, who talked about BVS as a revenge play. I mean, there were things that never even thought about. I didn't know anything about revenge plays, and I read that and I was like, "Oh, this is really interesting." So, how can that be empty when all of that can be found in BVS? So, I'm very curious about Joshua's perspective on that. How it can be seen as empty. Joshua also claims that BVS has zero humor. Now, in the subheading, it just said no humor. This time around, Joshua's saying zero humor. He quantified it. He put a number on how much humor was found in the film, and he said zero. Zero. He said zero humor. That means no humor whatsoever. I disagree with that completely. Perry White, Alfred, Martha Kent, they all have lines in the film where they are intentionally being bits of levity, characters, comedic relief characters. There's moments that I find particularly funny with Jenny. I'm trying to even think just like off the top of my head some other moments, but there are whole characters in the film where their existence is to bring levity to the dramatic things that are happening. So to say that it has zero humor in it, it's just not true. It is just not true. And I hate to be that person who's like, it's a lie, but it's not true. It is a lie because it's not true. So I can't fathom saying that about something that I knew. Even in the trailer, there's a moment where it's distinctly trying to be in one of the trailers. I can't remember if it might have been the third trailer that I think had the first bits with Wonder Woman, like the first big Trinity moment that was put in the trailer about, is she with you? No, I thought she was with you. That's an intentional joke. That right there disproves what Joshua's writing about zero humor. That one joke in that trailer, which he had to have seen. He had to have seen. Even if he didn't see the trailer, if he watched this film, he would have seen that moment. And that is as close as BVS got to being MCU bantery, quirky comedy. That's as close to the MCU as you would have gotten. So he would have had to have picked up on that. I just don't understand how somebody can walk away from BVS and say this had zero humor in it. Zero. It blows my mind. I can't. And this is a film like very prestigious. I just want to keep repeating that. This guy is in all of these critic associations. He's the vice chair of one of them. And he said that Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice had zero humor. Amazing. Before I go into the next thing, I just want to give y'all a little Perry White.
This copy all right.
Zero humor. Zero humor. Perry White exists. Please acknowledge him. I just want somebody to acknowledge in these reviews how great Perry White was in this film and how even just now seeing that clip made me laugh. I can't get over it. So I don't know if maybe he doesn't have a good sense of humor. Maybe he can't pick up on those things. Maybe I'm being hard on him. But I just think, oh boy, that's a really bold statement to put in a review about this film, that there is zero humor. Also, I think it's worth talking about how Joshua specifically seems to claim here that there is no self-deprecation comedy. He gets really specific about the comedy and the humor, really wanting there to be self-deprecation in the film for some reason. Comedy has a lot of different aspects that you can utilize. Back in the olden days, they had silent films where a lot of the comedy was physical. It was physical comedy. People fell off things and, fell down, or they would do silly things to make you laugh through physical comedy. Physical comedy is a justifiable, um, valid piece of comedy in there. Self deprecation is one of them, but there are so many other aspects of comedy that you can utilize that can be considered to be humor. So it's very strange to me that he singles out self deprecation humor in this. Um, I do wonder if some of Alfred's comedic lines in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice could be considered self deprecating. So I would be curious if Joshua was sitting next to me and we were having a conversation about BVS, I would ask him about some of those Alfred moments and whether or not he considered those to be self-deprecating. Uh, but even though Joshua has put this in this review, who says that that specific kind of humor, self-deprecation, has to be present in a film for it to be good? That's what I'm getting out of this review, is that he's saying there has to be humor, A, and B, it has to be self-deprecating humor. That's how I'm reading this. Maybe that's not how he meant it, but that's how I'm reading it. Um, and for me to read that, it's a very strange requirement from Joshua because, as I mentioned previously, I would categorize this film in the dramatic category. This film is a drama. It's not intended to be like, if it was a comedic film, if it was intended to be in the category of comedy, I would have much more expectation for there to be lots of comedy bits in it, because a comedy should make you laugh. A drama, I don't have that expectation. I go into it realizing this is more of a dramatic story, a dramatic film that I'm going to be taking in. Even action movies, like, I don't expect, maybe there's like a catchphrase or something some action hero says, but I don't expect an action film to be comedy, 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 comedy. So to me, it's strange that a lot of these critics will categorize this only BVS only in the category or the genre of comic book film. And that's all they think about it. They don't put it in the, like, if you were going to talk about, I don't know, Schindler's List, it's like the most dramatic film that I can think of because it's the most, like, some of the most serious topics. I'm sure there's lots of other serious films as well, but Schindler's List is one I can think of that, like, everyone can acknowledge that's a dramatic film. It's about Nazis, the Holocaust, concentration camps. You would not, you would put that in a dramatic category. You would put that in, I don't know if you'd put that in like some sort of historical category as well. I don't know how many of those exist, like what kinds of historic, uh, I wouldn't put it like maybe in documentary, but I'm sure there's other historic. I'm just kind of saying that out of ignorance. I'm sure there are historic categories, but something related to history. But I would not put Schindler's List under comedy. I wouldn't expect a lot of comedy out of Schindler's List because it's a dramatic film. So it's strange to me that these critics do not look at BVS for what it is, and they put all these categories onto it, and then they have expectations that come with those categories. So they put it into the genre of comic book film, and so they expect self-deprecating humor, and that's what they put onto it. Not even considering it that it could be in different other genres, which I think is, to me, that's just so strange. I saw somebody put in the chat, Zing Yingli says, I think the Schindler's List doesn't have enough color. Somebody should have told Steven Spielberg, you got to put more than just the little girl in the red. You got to put more color. If it doesn't have color, it's not a good film. Somebody should have told him. Yeah. So it boggles the mind. Okay. So I had a lot of questions about the self-deprecating humor and the requirement from Joshua here in this review. But he actually makes it very clear as to why he's putting this on the film. I was just kind of initially guessing about it, but I don't have to, because Joshua makes it very easily understood about why he thinks this. It's because he's requiring this on films, especially comic book films now, because he specifically points out Joss Whedon's The Avengers had self-deprecating humor. That's why. It's present in the Marvel movies, so of course it has to be there for every comic book film moving forward. Whew. It's unbelievable to me. This guy is a member of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association and is the vice chair for the National Society of Film Critics. And he says that comic book films, all comic book films, not only have to have humor, but that the comedy has to be very specifically self-deprecating, because that one superhero movie that Joss Whedon did in 2012 had humor that way. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. I just want people to take this in, because I had a moment when I was reading this review and making notes on it. I could not get over this. I'm having a hard time even now talking about it, like trying to get past this, because just the expectation that he's putting on this film, on Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, because of a film that came out 4 years previous to this one, that he put in the same category. I don't know that I would put, other than they are both films based on comic book characters, I don't even know that I would put The Avengers and BVS in the same category. If I was like labeling them for Netflix or something, or HBO Max or whatever, Disney Plus, I would not even assign the same categories for those two films. But he is putting that on this film. I find that absolutely fascinating. He also called The Avengers, quote, pitch perfect. Pitch perfect. I had a good laugh about that when I read this in this review. Because for me, the first time I saw The Avengers, I saw it in the theaters. I was hyped. I really enjoyed that first phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so I was really excited about it. And then when I got into the film and was actually watching it, I could not believe how many actors I thought were phoning it in that in that movie. I was so blown away by how they just seemed to be walking through it. They did not seem to care. In my opinion, the way I was watching the film, I was like, can you add a little more emphasis? Like, make this a little more exciting. I just felt like all the actors were phoning it in that movie. So the fact that he calls The Avengers pitch perfect, and then says that PBS has no strong performances. And he also says that there was no performance of, quote, unlikely depth, unquote, in BBS. I guess I just strongly disagree with Joshua's takes on both of these films, because I would actually make that same case for Whedon's Avengers in 2012, that there was no performance of unlikely depth and that there were no strong performances in that film. So I just don't get it. I don't get how he thinks that the performances in PBS do not have depth, but the Avengers is pitch perfect. I have a very hard time understanding that. So I really wish that Joshua would have gone more into detail about these things, because all I see in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice is depth, lots of it in every character. So I guess I would strongly disagree with Joshua here on that. He also goes on to say that there's, quote, no animating spirit of decency, a trait Christopher Reeve's Superman had in spades, unquote. First, I guess I would ask the question, how is there no spirit of decency in this film, in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice? Heroes save people. Bad guys either get killed by their own dumb decisions or they go to jail. So justice is achieved. Superman even saves Lex Luthor's life, even after Lex kidnapped his mom and threatened her life and pushed his girlfriend off of a skyscraper. That seems pretty decent to me. Superman is also shown saving a turned over ship, a space rocket, a little girl on a fire, rescuing people from a flood, showing up at a congressional hearing because it was the right thing to do, even though they were condemning him and putting him on trial, as it were. When you talk about Batman, Batman realizes his anger was misplaced and saves someone else's mother because he knew that he could help. Wonder Woman steps back into action against Doomsday because she knew she could help and she could assist them in that. Even non superpowered characters like Lois Lane, Senator Finch, and Secretary Swanwick are characters who pursue the truth. I would put those people under a spirit of decency. That's that's how I would describe them. I would call them characters that are showing a spirit of decency. So I would be curious as to why Joshua says that there is no character in the film that has that. I hate to burst people's bubbles on this, but I think a lot of people also misremember some of Christopher Reeve's Superman actions that are existing in some of those films. Some of those films do not stand up to today. They did not age well, in my opinion. So I think sometimes when people talk about Christopher Reeve's Superman, he is a great Superman, and he did a lot for the mythology of Superman, and he was a great torchbearer for the character during those times. Um, but I think sometimes when people talk about those films and Christopher Reeve's Superman in general, I think there's a lot of nostalgia that clouds the rose-colored glasses that people look at those films through. Because when I think of Christopher Reeve's Superman, I remember that Clark just let Lois float down Niagara Falls to keep lying to her about being Superman. Go back and watch Superman 2, the Lester cut. He lets Lois float down that river a long time before he tries to help her. I mean, she is just almost drowning, and she stays in that water for a while until he helps her. I don't think that's a very decent thing to do. How about the time that Superman gave up his powers just so he could have a little sexy time with Lois Lane? Screw the world. Who cares? I'm going to do something selfish. I don't feel like that's very decent. How about the two times that Clark wiped Lois's memory? Not once. He did this twice in the course of 4 films, both times without her consent, and once to make himself feel better. Uh, Honestly, in my opinion, sometimes Christopher Reeve's Superman is just the worst. Uh, so I really wish people would be objective and actually talk about the films instead of remembering them from their childhood. Because sometimes I would encourage people to go back and rewatch those films if you haven't in a while, just because I do not believe, in my opinion, that they hold up very well. And so, if you want to talk about characters that don't show decency, sometimes there are moments where Christopher Reeve Superman is decent and does the right thing, but there's sometimes where he's a real jerk. And he's sort of based off the Silver Age Superman, who is a jerk. So I just think that it's interesting that a lot of people will talk about Christopher Reeve Superman in that way, and they don't talk about the totality of his Superman, in my opinion. So let me hop back in the chat and see what folks are talking about while I ranted. Let's see. Let's see. We talked about Schindler's List. David has an interesting comment that ironically, the Avengers 2012 gets less and less funny, not just because some of it doesn't age well, but also because the MCU gets funnier and funnier after 2012. Oh, that's interesting. I would hope that they found new ways to add comedy, because that was sort of the MCU's thing, is that they did have a lot of comedy and they were playing to the family, which is fine. That's totally fine if that's your audience. So I would hope that they try to be fresh in some of the comedy that they used. I hope that for the MCU. So I'm glad that you think so. David also says this penultimate review is really getting to us. Yeah, this one almost knocked me out. It's rough. Oh. Sometimes when I talk about Christopher Reeve's Superman, I forget about this. Zing Yingli says Superman also peeked at Lois's undergarments. I just did it. Just straight up did it. Not even going to finish that thought. Not even going to finish it. I appreciate his place in the mythology, Christopher Reeve Superman, but Ooh, some of it I just don't like. Let's see. Let's see. All right, so I guess that covers a lot of things in the chat that I can get to because this may go on for a while. So I want to get back into the review. So, okay, Joshua says, "quote Instead, we have Henry Cavill's persistently inert Clark Kent, and somehow worse, Ben Affleck's one-dimensionally vexed Bruce Wayne squaring off in a metropolis is still reeling from the devastation seen in 2013's Man of Steel. Neither actor is capable of setting the screen on fire. Their first verbal showdown is hardly Pacino versus De Niro in Heat, but the imbalance feels especially acute in a city that's supposed to be publicly debating the philosophical merits of omnipotence." Uh, I'm going to come back to that as soon as I finish because I don't want to forget about this because I didn't make notes on that part, but now I have a thought. Add to the mix Jesse Eisenberg's instantly annoying, tick-laden Lex Luthor, a millennial billionaire who speaks in chattering screenwriter ease. And mentions the red capes are coming, and Amy Adams' Lois Lane nevermore lost in a film that has no use for her softness, and you have a distinctly plastic affair, unquote. Well, I would think that maybe you should have some room for Amy Adams's Lois Lane and her softness in a film in which her fiance or her would-be fiance dies in her arms. I feel like that character should be soft then, but we'll get to that. It is interesting to me that previous to this section of the review, Joshua really wants a lot of humor in this. He wants self-deprecating humor, but then he also demands that we publicly debate the philosophical merits of omnipotence. Which is it? Is this film a dramatic film that wants to talk about big ideas, or is it a film that just needs to be silly, self-deprecating jokes? What does it need to be? Because to me, those you can't totally have both. I know I mentioned Thor 2: The Dark World all the time on these reviews because it's, in my opinion, one of the worst films I've ever seen. But I say that because that film, I don't know the entirety of the behind the scenes of that film, but it felt like it was almost like Joss Whedon Justice League kind of stuff. It was like it was almost like it was two films trying to compete with each other. And I feel like if you had a film like BVS that wants to talk about big ideas and philosophy and theology, and then you were like jokey, 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 it would feel contradictory in terms. And so I think you have to, and I think what BVS does with the humor, because there is humor in this film, uh, is that it strikes a really good balance of comedy and humor and wit into it without becoming too jokey and cringy and silly. So you can have those big moments that really want to dive into big themes and questions and thoughts, and still have a little bit of levity. That's a hard balance to strike, and I think BVS actually accomplished it. Okay, so Joshua refers to Clark Kent as, quote, inert, unquote. I thought I knew what that meant, but I wanted to look it up just to be sure. Because sometimes when these reviewers write these reviews, I think they're digging into the thesaurus, which I totally would do if I was writing a review. So sometimes I'm like, do you normally say the word inert when you're talking to somebody, or you just did that because you needed another word? So I went to go look it up just to make sure I knew what it meant. And inert means lacking the power to move, very slow to move or act, sluggish, deficient in active properties, lacking a usual or anticipated chemical or biological action. So basically, it means slow, sluggish, lacking the power to move. So my question then is, how is Clark Kent slow to move in Batman v Superman? And isn't he expected to be slow given the secret identity situation? So I have a lot of questions about that. Or is Joshua actually talking about Superman being slow to act in BBS? Because he talks about a Clark Kent, an inert Clark Kent. So I would assume that if you were trying to go with the secret identity situation where you have a Clark Kent and a Superman who are very different. Well, if you have a Superman who's really fast to action, when you want Clark to be a little slower anyway, just because you don't want people to know that Clark is Superman. I'm just I'm just putting that out there. So if he's talking about Superman being slow to act in BVS, I don't agree with that either because Superman flies pretty fast to save Lois Lane in Africa. He ditches Lex Luthor's fancy party to save that little girl from a burning building in Mexico. So he's actually pretty quick when he when he moves. Superman moves especially quickly when presented with the doomsday problem and does absolutely everything to stop him. And eventually, sadly, he does do absolutely everything he could to stop him, which includes giving up his life. I will say, to be fair, Superman is only really actually slow during the Capitol bombing sequence, but it's because he couldn't see the bomb in Wallace's chair. And to be fair to Joshua here, that's not really fully explained in the theatrical cut. It that is made better in the extended Ultimate Edition. So that's the only thing I will grant Joshua when talking about the inertness of Clark Kent or Superman, because Joshua would have reviewed this. He would have done this review based on the theatrical version of the film. Joshua calls Ben Affleck a, quote, one-dimensionally vexed Bruce Wayne, unquote. I would love specifics on this opinion. Don't get any, I don't think. But I find Bruce Wayne very complex in BVS and very, his arc is a good one. And he goes through a lot of emotions and starts in one direction, starts at a point A at the beginning and gets to a point B by the end. So he goes on a character journey. He has a journey that he goes on to. So I would not agree that he's one dimensional. Joshua says, quote, neither actor is capable of setting the screen on fire. Their first verbal showdown is Harley Pacino versus De Niro in Heat, unquote. This came a couple of years later than when Joshua would have written this review, but according to a Justice Con live stream, I can't remember, this may have been talked about during the marketing time of BVS. I was trying to look this up and find this, so if anybody has any thoughts about the BVS comparison to Heat, I would be interested in it. But what I could find was that during one of the Justice Con live streams with Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio, which I've linked in the video description below this live stream, so you can go watch it for yourself. But according to Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio, Batman and Superman's first meeting was inspired by Pacino and De Niro in the film Heat. Chris Terrio says, quote, I seem to remember, Zack, I think we and Ben had a conversation about Michael Mann's movie Heat, right? About the cop who's been around, Pacino and De Niro, they've been around a minute, they've seen it all, and there was a bit of that tone even in Batman. And then they talked about the James Bond tone that we wanted to introduce a little more into his civilian scenes, unquote. And then Zack Snyder responded, quote, yeah, didn't we talk a little bit about having Heat inspire the first meeting of Superman and Batman, unquote. So maybe Joshua here didn't think that they captured that Heat inspiration, but kudos to Joshua. I'll give him that he at least caught on to what they were shooting for. He sort of saw a little bit of Heat in there and wanted to comment on it. Heat's a pretty good film, especially for that, kind of mid-90s era, but it's also not like the most exciting film. I don't know. Maybe I'll do a review of Heat at some point. When I was watching it, I was like trying to figure out why people talk about Heat all the time. But yeah, so there is a little bit of that in there. And I can kind of see what they were going for during both, because I'm not entirely sure if Heat inspired the first meeting of Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne at Lex Luthor's party, because I think there's some of that between De Niro and Pacino in Heat. But I also think that this could be applicable to the scene when Superman kicks the Batmobile. So either way, I think that they sort of used Heat as an inspiration, and I see it. Joshua doesn't, but I can see what they were going for. Continuing on, Joshua writes, quote, Lex Luthor, a millennial billionaire who speaks in chattering screenwriter ease. The red capes are coming, unquote. Personally, for me, I find it really interesting how this critic thinks that Batman v Superman is empty. He mentions that earlier on in the review. But in talking about Lex Luthor, the red capes are coming is the only thing he wanted to mention about that character in this review. Whew, this is going to be a lot. So just get ready for it. In my opinion, the red capes are coming isn't just screenwriter ease. Lex Luthor, when he is saying this, he is foreshadowing Senator Finch's death right in front of her face. Lex says this right after. This timing of this dialogue is very crucial. If you analyze this scene, you will pick up on this, I think. And if you don't, I'm going to tell you what I picked up on. Can't assume everybody's going to have my same thoughts. But Lex Luthor says the red capes are coming right after Senator Finch says that she's going to block the import license and not give him what he wants. He clinks his glass like he is going to moments later tap on the disc. So he clinks his glass, and then moments later, he also does that same kind of tapping on the desk. And he says, the red capes are coming. Now, the red capes are coming. If you are an American, you probably have some familiarity with this. It's very similar to the famous phrase, the British are coming, or the red coats are coming, which is a phrase attributed to Paul Revere, a very important figure in American history. So how fitting then for Lex Luthor to say this to an American senator, a United States senator, talking about American history, to foreshadowing her death, which she will die in the Capitol. the location of the federal government. How fitting for him to say this. Lex Luthor then sits down on the desk next to her and says, "You and your hearings." He is telling her to her face where he is going to kill her. He foreshadows her death completely in this. This is not screenwriter ease. This is just really excellent foreshadowing. The horse tapping means a lot more when he talks about you and your hearings, and he taps on the desk. That means a lot more when you put together the fact that there are other horses that appear throughout this film that signify death. So the tapping on the desk is hinting at horses, which are also used to visually symbolize and represent death. Anywhere there's death, anywhere there's a funeral, anywhere there is a tragedy, there is a horse. So it's just full of foreshadowing of Senator Finch's death here. And it kind of blew my mind when I went back and rewatched it for this review, because I've known like he was foreshadowing her death and all this kind of stuff. But I did not realize that he explicitly told her where he was going to kill her, because he mentions the hearings. And because, of course, he blows Senator Finch up at the hearing. They don't get to finish the hearing. He destroys everyone in that room at the hearing. Then, in that same scene, when he and Senator Finch are talking, he starts to ask her his, "Do you know the oldest lie in America?" question. And, of course, if you continue to watch the film, you will know that he only gets to finish and answer that question for her right before she goes into the hearing, where she will then get blown up. So, and of course, there's also the Granny's peach tea. She drops that mention of Granny's peach tea, and of course, right before he blows her up, he puts Granny's peach tea on her desk where she's sitting in the hearing. And Lex Luthor even ends the scene talking about the painting being upside down and how devils come from the sky. Well, the Capitol building sequence is just another instance of Lex Luthor trying to frame Superman. He thinks that Superman is the devil coming from the sky. And so this is one of his instances where he is actually going to try and make Superman look bad in the public image and tarnish his image to the United States and to the world. So the dialogue placement is very significant and full of meaning and weight in that scene, in my opinion. So it's amazing to me that a professional film critic who is a vice chair of one of these organizations he's a part of could watch that sequence and not reflect on all of that. It's amazing to me. This is not screenwriter ease. This is excellent screenwriting. This is Chris Terrio at his finest. This is why anytime you ask Jesse Eisenberg about Chris Terrio, it's like a love fest when he starts talking. going through that Lex and Finch scene line by line is how I pick up on these things, and that's how you analyze film. So I would expect, I guess I'm putting my expectations on Joshua as a professional film critic, that I would expect him to analyze those lines of dialogue. I think it's possible. I'm just sort of guessing as to how he would not pick up on this thing is maybe he just, again, probably watched it once before he watched wrote a review. He probably did not get a second viewing for PBS, or didn't want a second viewing. But I think he just watched it and didn't have time to analyze it. Because when you actually, in my opinion, when I break those scenes down line by line and actually look at the dialogue and the screenwriting, that's when I start to have a lot of respect for it. Because it's telling you a lot of things. It's making a lot of use of all the words in the dialogue. It's very well chosen. So if you go line by line, the sequencing here is much more important when you break it down like that and actually analyze the scene. So it's shocking to me that a professional film critic who is part of these prestigious organizations does not do that. And I'm actually quite disappointed in the fact that that is not the case. He also, as I mentioned earlier, says, quote, Amy Adams is Lois Lane, never more lost in a film that has no use for her softness, unquote. If I could ask Joshua, I would want him to clarify or give more explanation into why he thinks Lois Lane is lost in the film. She's in it a good bit and has a very clear path and emotional journey that she goes on. She has a very clear storyline that she's trying to uncover what is going on behind the framing of Superman. She knows the stuff that's going out there is not true, and so she has a very clear path from the moment that that bullet hits her journal that sends her on a journey. So she has a very clear journey that she goes on. So I don't know how she could be lost, because when I think of a lost character, they don't know where they're going. She knows exactly where she's going. I also find it interesting that a woman who interviewed a general/terrorist in Africa called Lex Luthor psychotic to his face and gathered the evidence needed to put Lex behind bars is called soft. I don't know how you could come to that conclusion. Joshua also calls Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, quote, a distinctly plastic affair, unquote. I say this out of love because this is what I've learned. I actually learned this from Entertainment Weekly. Jeff Jensen maybe was the critic, I think, at EW.com at the time. He was right. I used to love reading his Lost reviews. Lost, the TV show from ABC, the greatest TV show of all time, in my opinion. But he used to write weekly reviews, and it was fun to kind of read his thoughts about it because he was a big fan of the show. And he said something, I think it was in the review for the finale, the series finale episode, which is very, there's contentious, heated debate among fans about whether it was good or not. I loved it, but some people did not. They were unhappy. But I remember he wrote that review and said something to the effect of, you get out of it what you put into it. And that has always stuck with me, especially when I review something, if it's a TV show episode, if it's a trailer, if it's a movie, if it's I'm listening to a piece of music or reviewing a book, talking about a book, whatever I think about that comes from my experiences, comes from my life experience, from the things that I've gone through in my life, how that plays into how I read characters, how I understand story, the things that I'm putting into it from my life, or what's going to inform how I get things out of it. And so when someone says this was a plastic affair, I think, well, maybe that's because you didn't put anything into it. Maybe if you had actually watched that Senator Finch and Lex Luthor scene and actually done put a little more effort into analyzing the scene, maybe you would have found something interesting in it. I always think that that's it's a lazy thing to say. I could probably, if I really wanted to, I could rewatch Thor 2: The Dark World And I could have an analysis of that film. Probably it might have changed since the first time I watched it, because I watched it when it came out, and it's been a long time since then. And so maybe my life experience would help me see that film in a different light. I don't know. But I could probably talk about it in a meaningful way if I really wanted to. I don't, because I didn't like it. But I could probably, if I made the effort, if I put something into it, I would probably get something out of it. So, in my opinion, you're only going to get plastic out of a film if all you put into it is plastic. I personally have dissected the crap out of BBS, and I'm continually discovering new things about it as I analyze fresh aspects of it. People in these live chats have shared some of their perspectives with me that I had never thought about, and that's informing new things about how I see the film. So it takes, and I've seen BBS. I don't know. I've lost count. I don't know how many times I've seen it. I also know a lot of people who have analyzed the screenwriting, story, and filming of filmmaking of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and I don't want to speak for them, but I can't say that I know anybody who has done a serious study of the film who I think would tell you that it's just, quote, a plastic affair, unquote. But I don't want to speak for them, so you'd have to ask the Justice League podcast. You'd have to check with Batman v Superman by the Minute podcast, the DC Cinematic Minute podcast, the DC Squadcast guys, or Man of Steel Insight Commentary. Check with them. See if they think Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice is a plastic affair. I'd be curious. My guess is they would say no, that they would not agree with that. But I think that if you put plastic into something, you're going to get plastic out of it. So I would just encourage people, when you review something, think about that, because that's always been something I think about quite a bit. I'm going to hop in the chat while I have a stopping point to see if there's anything that I missed. Let's see. Yeah, Andy says, I'm sorry, did he just crap on Amy Adams as Lois Lane? Yeah, I think he did. It's perplexing. I know. David says, inert also means less likely to chemically react. Ironically, the noble gases, including krypton, are largely inert chemicals. That's interesting. Eric, I did watch some of the Zack Snyder Q&A on the Nerd Queens YouTube channel. So I highly encourage everybody to check it out if they haven't. He talked about AFSP and the SnyderCon stuff that's going to be happening in April. I didn't get to finish it, but I did see some of it. So yeah, it does seem like he will be doing a Zack Snyder Justice League commentary, possibly on Vero. So definitely stay tuned for that. Let's see. Interesting. Eric also says Bruce's arc is that of Ahab and Moby Dick. Full confession, I've never read Moby Dick. I need to read it. I know of it. Maybe I read it in high school. Maybe. But if I did, I don't remember much about it. I'm sure I must have had to in high school. But even if I did, I need to give it another try. Because it's been, I don't know. My memory is fogged. I either did or didn't read it in high school. If I did read it, it was probably in high school. But Eric goes on to say his helplessness has caused his obsession to protect, which causes him to go down to the path of where Joe Scholl once found himself when he killed his parents, and that Martha moment was a wake-up call. Yeah, that's a good thought. Xing Yingli says the irony about that painting in Lex's office is that in the Snyder Cut, Superman came from the ground while Steppenwolf came from the sky. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. That is a really cool thought, and I thank you for sharing it. Let's see. Thiago says, do you think the scene of young Bruce ascending from the underground towards the sky is also a reference to that painting? Oh, that is a good thought. I've never actually thought about that either. And just to sort of yes and that thought, I'd have to remember exactly what the I guess they would be subtitles on the screen. I always have to think before I speak about subtitles and captions because there's a slight difference. But in the scene when the cops first go after Batman, Batman has rescued these ladies, and he's like up there kind of interrogating that guy that, gets burned with the bat. What is that thing called? I can't think of the word. But in that first scene with Batman in BVS, The ladies try to say something in their language to the cops, and I think they say something about devil. Somebody can fact check me on there. Um, but I think that's a really I'm gonna think on this. This is a really interesting thought that Batman early on could be seen as the devil, which is also interesting because he fights with God and he's a fallen character. Ooh, that's juicy. I'm gonna think on that. That's a good thought. Okay. Uh, Andy also says, you already put yourself through Supergirl season 6. Don't you dare hurt yourself by watching the Thor 2 The Dark World again. There's only one film I think I've sworn I will never rewatch, which is Artificial Intelligence, which was sort of started by Stanley Kubrick and then finished by Steven Spielberg. I did not have a great first viewing of that. The only thing was good about it was the teddy bear. Um, I've rewatched a lot of films that I didn't initially like Romeo and Michelle's High School Reunion and oh my gosh, The Legend of Ricky Bobby, Talladega Nights: The Legend of Ricky Bobby. I didn't like that initially either, and both comedies that I love. They're some of my favorites. So I am willing to re-watch something and have my mind changed on them. Uh, but Thor 2 and AI might be tough sells for me. But again, if I wanted to find something in there, if I wanted to have a conversation with somebody, there are some instances where I might come into contact with somebody who loves Thor 2. And I could be able to have a conversation with them and engage with them on their level of love of that film if I wanted to. If I was going to review it and be really, objective about it, I would probably say it stinks as a film. But if I wanted to have a conversation with somebody who loved it, I probably could. Eric also talks about the Snyder Con stuff, saying there's got a screening of BBS on April 29th with Snyder and a guest. Spoiler alert, I'm going to try to go. I've already been looking into hotels in that area and trying to figure out how I can make that logistically happen. I've already drafted some questions I have specifically about BBS. I want to ask him about BBS specifically and about film criticism. Surprise, surprise. So I've already been thinking about that. So I am going to try to go. If I can get tickets, I'm definitely going to be checking that out. David also fact checks me on that scene. The ladies say, quote, "It saved us, a devil," unquote. Oh, that's good. That's a good thought. See, I love these live streams. We're all kind of sharing our own different perspectives. And I think that makes the viewing experience much richer. David also mentions vengeance devils are very big in Asian mythology. That's very interesting. David also asks, was there a Kubrick movie you watched and didn't like? I'm gonna have to think about it because I've tried to watch all of his filmography. They all have something fairly good about them. Let me get back to that. Let me answer that question once I revisit some of the titles. I will maybe I'll do a Kubrick series. Maybe I'll do that. That's a good idea because I sort of like studying Stanley Kubrick. I will say 2001: A Space Odyssey is a weird film. I love it so much. It's beautiful. So there's probably a lot to talk about with Stanley Kubrick. So yeah, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do a series on my favorite directors. Don't hold me to that, but it's a really good idea. Let's see. Rachel came by just to say penultimate. Thanks for dropping by, Rachel. Yeah, so this is the penultimate of these big reviews that I'm doing. It's not going to say that this is the last that I'm going to talk about BBS. I'll probably talk about BBS a lot. But for this particular project, it's the next to last. Let's see. All right, so let's get back to the review because we've gone long, and I don't want to hold y'all too long. But let's just get through the review, and then maybe we'll revisit the chat after we wrap up. So where did we finish? We finished. We left off on the plastic affair. So Joshua says, quote, "The plot turns on the shocking never mentioned again, never mentioned again." Remember this phrase: destruction of a symbolic American edifice, a bloodless explosion that one-ups the flattening of the White House in Independence Day for glibness. Minutes later, put that in the back of your brain, we're supposed to be whipped into a fanboy frenzy by the tribal drumming that accompanies our first hints of Gal Gadot's severely corseted Wonder Woman. A character that could use some complexity, and if it's not too late, a better actor. The end game is your typical WrestleMania nonsense, bereft of weight or grandeur, set in a generic rubblescape that's emblematic of the script's lack of human stakes. Only the movie's seesawing, Sergei Prokofiev, I don't know if I butchered that, but I probably did, inspired score by Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL contains a glimmer of wit. Shamelessly, Batman v Superman lunges for a funeral. Sorry, I thought I had that word and then I didn't. Funeral. A funeral mood. I'm going to have to look up the pronunciation of that later because that is a hard word to say. In its final stretch, but come on, we all know superheroes don't die, not when there are reboots in the balance. After this one, you'll wish a few of them did. Unquote. And I believe that's the end of the review. So I've got some thoughts here. All right. So to start off, Joshua says the destruction of a symbolic American edifice was never mentioned again. Just never. It's like the zero humor. There was zero humor, and they destroyed an American edifice, meaning the Capitol building, and it was never, ever, ever mentioned again. 0 times was it mentioned again. Never in the film was it ever mentioned again. Not true. Let's get into it. So, even if you were going to argue that it was never mentioned again, it is. But let's just say, for argument's sake, they never mentioned the destruction of the Capitol building again. Something bigger happens in BBS that would require more focus. And that thing is Superman dies. So that's a pretty big deal, I think. So even if the Capitol building blew up and then the film just went way past it and never mentioned it again, it's probably because Superman died and the Capitol building was important, but also Superman died. And that would be an even bigger deal. But that's not entirely what happens. The Capitol building is huge news in BBS, the bombing, huge news. CNN covers it live on television. Lois Lane is there representing the Daily Planet. This is a big deal. What Joshua unfortunately didn't get to see in the theatrical version is that Zack Snyder did shoot follow-up to the moment when the Capitol blows up. In the extended Ultimate Edition, we see that Superman stays around to help rescue survivors and assist the first responders. The Ultimate Edition also has a scene with Alfred learning about what happened from CNN's broadcast. The Ultimate Edition even shows Lois Lane going to Wallace Keefe's apartment to investigate what he was living like, and kind of what was going on in his life. And there's graffiti all over the walls in Keefe's apartment of the Capitol building. So let's just say there's a lot more stuff happening in the Ultimate Edition. But was there follow-up in the theatrical version? That's the question, because this is the version that Joshua would have watched and reviewed. Well, there's a moment when Jenny is reading an article that wonders if Superman was complicit in the Capitol bombing tragedy. At the end of that same scene, CNN has a talking head on a television wondering if Superman was in on the attack. All of the news outlets are talking about it. Citizens are shown on the news protesting and burning a Superman effigy. There is also a scene in which Superman and Lois talk about it while they are both still in Washington, D.C., where this happened. And we know this because the viewer can still see that the Washington Monument is next to Superman in a shot. So this goes back to my question about the humor. Is Joshua just forgetting about all of this because he probably only saw it once and then reviewed it? Or is he lying to us? I don't know. But either way, that is a lie. That is not, it's an untruth. It is not true. There is follow-up to that destruction of a symbolic American edifice. To say that it was never mentioned again is not true. That is false. Joshua also paints the film as having blown up the Capitol building, and then minutes later, just a couple minutes later after the Capitol bombing, Wonder Woman is just fighting Doomsday. We go right. I mean, he writes it as if nobody cares about the Capitol bombing tragedy. It's not a big deal. That the film just rushes through it. That's how it comes across in this review. Well, guess what I did? I went to the film. I went to the theatrical version and marked to see if I could figure out how many minutes later. How many minutes later? Was this like 1 to 2 minutes later? Was this like 5 minutes later? How long was this minutes later? He doesn't give us a specific number. So from the end of the Capitol bombing scene until Wonder Woman saves Batman is 50 minutes later. It's almost an hour later in the theatrical cut. He makes it seem in this review as if it's just minutes later, like 10 minutes later. I mean, it was so rushed. It's almost an hour later that this happens. He says minutes later, we're supposed to be whipped into a fanboy frenzy after the glibness of destroying an American edifice. He makes it seem like the film doesn't care. There's 50 minutes in between those things. 50 minutes. It's incredibly misleading from Joshua here. Incredibly misleading. Now, to be fair to him, he probably, again, wrote this with having one viewing, and he probably wasn't, timing it out. He probably didn't go through it specifically. To him, it probably felt like minutes. What he should have written, though, if that was the case, he probably should have written in the review, seemingly minutes later, or what felt like minutes later. Not minutes later as if he had calculated it. Because that's really misleading. It gives the appearance to the reader that the film did not take a very serious thing seriously. When it actually did. He also said, he writes, quote, BBS is bereft of weight or grandeur, unquote. Well, that's a bold statement. I absolutely 100% disagree with this statement, and Joshua gives no examples to demonstrate this. I cannot imagine how someone could watch Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice and say that there's no weight or grandeur about it. It's all weight and grandeur. What film was he watching? Did he watch this film? He also writes, quote, the script's lack of human stakes, unquote. What was he watching? People died in Africa. People died in the Capitol building, including United States senators and Lex Luthor's loyal number 2, Mercy Graves. Lois Lane is thrown off a skyscraper. Martha Kent is kidnapped and almost burned to death. Lex Luthor created an unkillable monster. Superman dies. And then there's that little thing at the end where Lex Luthor made contact with some new alien threat that was coming, which forces Bruce and Diana to form the Justice League so they can probably stop it. No stakes. No human stakes. I guess maybe he was arguing that, like, the only stake that happened in this film was that Superman died. And he's an alien, so there's no human stakes to it. Oh my gosh. He talked about the destruction of the American edifice and then said there was no human stakes in it. Well, who did he think was in the Capitol building? Having said all that, I'm really glad that Joshua is objective enough to recognize that BBS's score that was done by Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL is magnificent, because it is. It's one of the best. So I'm guessing that the score might be one of those 2 stars out of 5 that I was wondering about. I imagine he gave 1 star to the score. He also said that Batman v Superman lunges for a funeral mood in its final stretch, which makes sense because there's 2 funerals at the end of the film. He also writes, quote, "We all know superhero," but he writes that though. I should mention that he writes this as if it's a bad thing, that it goes into a funeral mode in its final stretch. Well, yeah, because there are funerals. That's not a bad thing. That's not a negative. That's just what happens in this story. Uh he also writes, quote, "We all know superheroes don't die," unquote, which is interesting to me because in reading through all of these reviews, a lot of the critics made big deals, maybe more than they should have, about how they were asked not to spoil anything. But I guess Joshua either didn't get that memo or just didn't care because he outright told me that a superhero dies in this film. So I guess there's that. So you would have been really spoiled if you had read this in 2016. And then he writes, this is how he ends the review. He writes, quote, "After this one, you'll wish a few of them did," unquote. And he means did die. Um, I guess I'm a little confused on this ending and the way that Joshua chooses to end this review. He ends it on wishing that some of the superheroes in the film die. He makes it clear that he didn't like Henry Ben or Gall's performance, but geez, wishing that the characters would die. That's intense. He doesn't even really go on to say why. He didn't seem to like their performances. I guess he didn't like the story. He didn't really kind of go into that too much. But he gave really no example or justification for pretty much anything he wrote. Um, and what he did provide examples of and go about specifically in his writing was not true. So I don't really know how he jumps to, "You should wish that these characters would die." This is kind of an intense way to end this review. So I'll just be honest. I didn't really like this one. Sometimes I'll read these reviews and I'm like, nah, I can maybe see why this person thought this, and at least it was written well. I guess there are parts of this review that could be seen as written well, but there are just so many false things about it, just straight up lies, that it's hard to take it seriously, in my opinion, for me anyway. I can read a review and deal with somebody who disagrees with my opinions, but when it's so negative and like, "Well, you should wish all these characters were dead," and just kind of starts off like this genre should take a break and die a miserable death, essentially is what he was trying to say. Um, it's really hard. I mean, like, almost everything was negative that he wrote about. I don't even know what that second star was for. He seemed to like the score, and that was it. So, this one was a hard one to read because I just disagreed with almost everything. Sometimes these reviewers, like, make good points, and I can be like, "Yeah, I can see how you get to that conclusion," but this one was really tough. This is a really tough one. Um, Probably, I have to say, in my opinion, one of the worst that we've gone through in this one. This one was, like, severely rough. Um, just because, again, it goes back to my personal stance on how to review things, which I guess everyone operates differently, but I don't wanna lie to my audience. I wanna make sure I get things correct and accurate, and I wanna be as, truthful and honest about things so that when I say my opinion, if I have the facts straight, maybe my opinion will make sense. But when your facts are not correct, that makes me not this me as a reader. I don't speak for anybody else, but me as a reader, if you don't even get your facts straight, I don't care what you have to say. I don't care about your opinion. So once you say a bunch of things that are not true in a review, I'm not taking anything else you say seriously. So that's why I try to go about saying as much as I can that is correct to my knowledge, and then from there I can build my opinion on something. So everybody operates a little differently, I guess. But that's kind of my expectation that I've set for myself and that I hold for film critics. And so this was really, in that regard, difficult to read. Um, and I'm going to hop into the chat and then we'll wrap this up because I've kept y'all too long. Eric says, a lack of human stakes. After the crap criticism they gave for Man of Steel with the Metropolis destruction, Snyder made it a point to keep people away. Exactly. There was after the people of the time in 2013, these critics like re what is the word? Just put Man of Steel just over the coals. Reeked? Is it do you reek something over the coals? I'm like having uh just memory blanks on this live stream, but they just gave Man of Steel the business about the destruction. And so because of that, they made it a point to say, no, this big fight is happening in this uninhabited area because in Man of Steel, you did not like it when we had a big fight in an inhabited area. So they intentionally, because of that criticism, made it happen so that the fight did not harm any civilians or any citizens, and people still complained about it. You can't, I think that goes to show you cannot please everybody. You will never please everybody. And so just do what you think is best. Mask of Shy brings up the point that when Lex Luthor sends Bruce Wayne those pages after the Capitol bombing, he writes, Big Bang, let your family die. Oh, that's such a villainous thing to do. But yeah, human stakes everywhere. Let's see. Yeah, and then Zing Yingli says that the lack of human stakes in the Doomsday fight was the filmmakers intentionally uh, put it in an uninhabited area due to the Man of Steel backlash. Yeah. Um. Okay. Let's see. Still going through these comments. Let's see. Yeah, Eric also says the 3 scores in the DCEU. I'm guessing you mean Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League. Yeah, those scores are pretty stellar. I've been listening to a lot of Man of Steel's score lately. Yeah, that's it might be my favorite of the 3, but BVS's is right up against it. Andy wonders if the reviewer got drunk or something because this review got extremely overly melodramatic. Yeah, the tone of it seems really harsh and negative. Like, to me, even if I didn't like a film, I would probably still. This is just me kind of speaking from like a perspective of a film critic. Like, if I was gonna write a film review about Thor 2: The Dark World, I would keep it to the film. I would keep it to, this is what I thought didn't work, that I thought that the two tones of the film didn't jive together. I would probably talk about that a lot. Um, I would probably talk about how the villain was kind of forgettable. I would talk about how the film opened up. I remember it opened up with exposition. Ew, that's not a great way to open up a film. You throwing exposition at me right out of right at the opening of the film. Ooh, that's a rough way to start. So I would probably talk about the actual merits of the film and give examples. I would try not to make it a personal thing, like, oh, Thor to the Dark World offended me personally. I would just talk about what I thought it didn't do well as a film. Eric also asks, can you do a series on Zack Snyder's Justice League themes when you're done with BBS? Maybe. I haven't done a lot with Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I probably should. I probably won't do a long series. Like, I mean, this one I've done about the BBS criticism, it's taken a long time. And that's on me mostly. I could have done it in a year, probably less than a year. But because of my schedule, it made me do it longer. But there's probably some things that I would like to talk about. I'd probably like to talk about Cyborg and Lois and Superman, definitely. So I'd have to think about that, how I want to, because I don't want to just do like a straight review. I'd probably like want to talk about certain instances about it and some of the things that I connected with and that I think I would have something of value to, because I never want to do these to just do them. I want to do them so that I add value. That's also something that I think is important for film criticism, is that there should be something in your film review that you can add value to somebody about. If you have some educational thing that you want to share to the reader or the viewer, add that. Um, I always want to read a review or watch something. Like if I'm somebody watching this live stream, I want to be able to get something out of it that I didn't have beforehand. So if I have something that I think that I can add value to, yeah, I'll try to do something with Zack Snyder's Justice League. Let's see. Um uh David wants me to bring on some guests. Oh, that might be something I might try to do. I've been wanting to do that for a while. I wanted to do something about fans, bringing other fans on the old live stream here. So if you're a regular viewer of these live streams, thanks for hanging in, and maybe I'll, you know, try to bring some of y'all in here and get your thoughts, because everybody who comes to these live streams always has some really cool things and perspectives to share that I hadn't thought about. So I always want to talk to some other folks. And David says, like that gentleman from the Fakest. So if people don't know, I did some voice acting in a audio dramedy podcast called The Fakest. You can go to thefakest.com, Fakest with an I. I played a character named Leanne Snyder because my friend Bill Meeks, who wrote it and edited it and acted in it, knew I was a big Snyder fan. So he named my character with the last name Snyder. So yeah, you can check that out. And his name is Bill, and he's a really good guy. Has a lot of thoughts. He's a screenwriter, and so he could probably talk a little bit about the screenwriting in some of these films. So I definitely think that I'll try to do more guest things, roundtable discussions, like Eric mentioned. So that was one thing that I wanted to do before, but then I got kind of deep into these live streams. So maybe that's in the future. After I wrap this up, just so that everybody knows my plans, I'm going to wrap up the final review that we're going to look at from the top critics of Rotten Tomatoes, because these are based on, there may be more now after 2016, but these are based on the initial top critics of Rotten Tomatoes from 2016. So these are the freshest of the fresh top critics who took a look at BVS. And so these are the ones that I made notes on back in 2016 when I first started doing this study. And so these are the live streams that we're doing based on those notes. So my last review in my notes from that time there's one more. And so I'll be talking about that one. And then after that, what I would like to do is offer up some solutions. I talk a lot about how I don't think some of these reviews were written well, or some of the problems with them, or some of the approaches that I didn't like and that kind of don't connect with the way I look at film criticism. So in my opinion, I think film criticism is broken. It's just broken. It's bad. I think it used to be a real art form, and now it feels like people are just doing it to get onto the next movie. It feels very jaded. And so I want to offer up some ways to fix it. I don't want to just critique it and be negative. I want to offer up some solutions on how to make film criticism better. So that's going to be I'll probably do that as a pre-recorded video. So I'll probably have that premiere so that people can hop on the live chat if you want to, but that'll be sort of my final take on film criticism of BBS, is trying to offer up solutions. And these will probably mostly be based on the reviews that we read. So a lot of the problems that we've encountered here in these film reviews, I want to offer up some solutions on how to correct those. So that'll be interesting for discussion to see what everybody thinks about that. But that's my kind of wrapping up of my BBS series, is trying to offer up a solution. I can't guarantee when that will come out, but I want to offer up a few solutions on that. So there is that. So after that, I don't know. I'll figure out kind of what I want to do. It seems like a lot of people like Snyder stuff here on this YouTube channel. So I'll try to maybe do a couple of things on Zack Snyder's Justice League. I really want to do something on the women in Snyder films, because I think Zack Snyder gets a really bad. He has a bad reputation for female characters, which I'm like, his female characters are the best. So I'll probably do something on the female characters in Snyder films. So that may be a series, and or just one video. I don't know. Probably a series. So I don't know. We'll figure that out. Maybe I'll do a Stanley Kubrick series. That actually sounds really fun. So we'll do that. I also want to do something of my favorite directors. Maybe do like my top 10 favorite movies, something like that, and then review those and sort of practice film criticism in that way, to really be objective about the films that I love the most. So yeah, there are lots of possibilities. So let me know what you guys want to see, and I'll try to see if I can make that happen. Okay. David asks, how many top reviews are there altogether? I cannot remember, but it's something like 38 or 39. So we almost got to 40 with these live streams. Anyway, so thank you all for your feedback and for your thoughts, and sharing your comments and questions and perspectives on this review. And I think it's really good to have these discussions, because then we can all think about how we would review it. How would we do it differently? Joshua obviously has his own way of reviewing films and how he writes in terms of being a film critic. I would go about it a different way, but this is a good introduction to seeing how other people do it and how maybe we would do it differently. So there is that practice. All right. Well, I think I've gone on way too long, but that's going to do it for this week's live stream. If you missed this live, I hope you'll consider sharing your thoughts in the comment section below. If you would like to be a guest on a live stream with me and talk about BBS or why you love Snyder's films, leave a comment. Let me know if you want to come on and be a guest, and we'll try to see if we can get that arranged. I would love to do a series of fan stuff. So leave me a comment saying, hey, I want to be on the live stream. We can maybe make that happen. So if you have any questions about when I'm going to be live, check this YouTube channel. I'll be scheduling streams in advance when I'm available. And if you have a BBS review or any kind of review that you would like to share that you think did a good job, comment below and share it with me, and I'll share it in future videos and share it with the class, as it were, so that everybody can see it and we can talk about what we thought was good, instead of always talking about what we thought was negative or poorly done. So anyway, having said all of that, I'm going to let a voiceover Rebecca take over, and she is going to end this live stream for us. If you would like to see more of these live streams, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/duckmilkprod. If you'd like to keep in touch with me personally, you can follow me on Instagram at The Derby Kid and on Vero at Derby Kid. You can hear my thoughts on the CW Supergirl TV series and all things Kara Zor-El over at Supergirl Radio by visiting supergirlradio.com, subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts, or subscribing to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/DCTV Podcasts. Also, please check out the Justice League Universe podcast for in-depth analysis on the DCEU films, including Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And before I go, I hope that this live stream video series will inspire you to think more critically and thoughtfully about film and storytelling. I'd like to leave you with this quote from C.S. Lewis's book titled An Experiment in Criticism. The truth is not that we need the critics in order to enjoy the authors, but that we need the authors to enjoy the critics. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life.